All right, so I have with me today Dave Stewart. He's an oil painter based in Montreal, Canada. He's originally from Vancouver. David completed his BFA in 2009 at Emily Carr University and his MFA in 2022 at Concordia University. In the intervening years between degrees, David taught English in South Korea and China while developing his painting practice. His current work is based on a personal archive of images taken by friends and family with a focus on homosocial relationships and nature. Dave, thanks for being here today.
Pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. I'm curious, in your bio, you're talking about homosocial relationships. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that might be a little bit of a residue of grad school and wanting to maybe use bigger words than you need to. In layman's terms, really, a lot of the paintings, not all of them, but a lot of them have been about just interpersonal relationships amongst men. And for me, like my work's always kind of autobiographical or personal in some way. That's just, I think I was influenced like a lot from like singer-songwriters from the 60s, things like that, just make stuff about your life. And for me, one of the unique things about where I grew up and the people I grew up with is there's been sort of the same kind of core group of guys I've known since I was in elementary and middle school. And as I've gotten older, that group has still kind of maintained its structure, still keep in touch with people. And they're all kind of now, we're in our mid-30s, so people of different class, very different political beliefs, different sort of career aspirations. Like I have a friend living in Calgary, Canada, who's like a family doctor. I got another friend from the same fifth grade class who, runs a tire business. So for me, I kind of made work about them in my early 20s at Emily Carr when we were all, sort of party boys on the weekend living in the suburbs. And I kind of stumbled upon some of those old pictures towards the end of my MFA program, kind of wondering what to paint. And some of these source images were things I hadn't looked at for 10 years. And when you're 35, being reminded of things you did when you're 20, you're that whole idea of you kind of have some historical distance to it. And I was kind of interested in looking at some of these images again, and they kind of became the formation of a body of work. And I never would have thought, when I was a teenager in my early 20s, I'd be making work about, the people I grew up with, or even the city I grew up in, the city of Port Coquitlam. But as I get older, especially living in Montreal, Canada, halfway across the country, I find that distance kind of interesting. So that's one of the things I kind of explore in my work. Along with things like nature, especially being from British Columbia, those are some of the themes that seem to keep kind of coming back into orbit over a much longer cycle too, right? Because some of these are things that I was interested in when I was 20, and I'm interested in still in my mid-30s. And I think that kind of is a bit of a litmus test, right? You have ideas that continue to entrance you as you get older over more than a decade, and I think maybe there's something there.
I remember I was reading this book by Robert Bly, and it was called Iron John. And he was telling this story, and really the whole premise of the book is how lacking Western culture is in providing, I would say I would say symbolically and practically, something that a young person, a young boy kind of growing into manhood can refer to as to understanding what it means to be a man. Mm-hmm. And this is something that certainly has been blown out of proportion in different aspects in our culture, and I would say in a very disproportionate way, that has it's created a lot of damage, I think, to young men, sort of trying to find their place in a society, you know,
Mhm.
in relationships to one another, um, and to other genders, and I feel like, you know, what he talks about in the book is, and he looks at other cultures, and even ones that we would consider in some sense primitive, how there's this concrete point, there's this something that can be pointed to, referred to, when the boy departs from his boyhood and enters into manhood and is given this sort of trial or journey, you know, and there's a point of departure into something, this invitation into something um, different, which allows him to move forward and grow, and sort of accept this, you know, this role, right, that he has within that culture, and what those expectations of those roles are. Um, and I found that to be so interesting, you know, and so Robert Bly was saying, you know, one of the biggest problems is that our culture produces this, what he calls flyboys, which are men who are, you know, like in their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s to early 40s, who are not grounded, who are not anchored by like personal responsibility and the level of maturity that, you know, is needed to take care of, to be a steward over things, over a family, you know, over,
Mhm.
to be entrusted with the lives of other people in a sense, right? um and to be a caretaker of things, which is just the starting point, right? Like,
Mhm.
and ultimately to be life-giving by pouring out one's own self, right, in a sense. You know, and he says like the flyboy is the man who's not anchored, he's in the air, he's flying. And so he says what we have as a result is like a lot of grown up boys who still have yet to make that departure and really root themselves, um, to this place, root themselves to these things that otherwise would, to these things that really do beckon a type of death, type of dying, you know, to the boy, to make room for like this new life, this emergence of the man, you know. What do you think about that, like in your own relationships, and just sort of like, you know, as you personally and as an artist, and I mean, how do you relate to, I mean, do you, well, one, do you think about that in your work, and then two is like, how, if you do, like, how do you relate to that through your art?
Wow. Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with this idea of flyboys. Um, and sometimes I think for myself, you know, like in the bio you mentioned that I taught abroad for a number of years, and in some ways that was hard for me because it was actually harder coming home than being over there
Mhm.
because you actually did have, when I was in China and Korea, it was very concrete. It was like you're on a visa, you're in this country for a specific reason, you're here to teach, you know. You were given your own apartment for the first time. That was, you didn't have to pay for it, which is great. Um, and you had like a 9 to 5 job, you had some extra spending money, which were things that like were very difficult to get or have in Vancouver. You know, it's kind of, for Americans, it's kind of got a similar cost of living to maybe like San Francisco, you know. Um, so I had an early, I was lucky out of art school, I was able to do that and kind of have a bit of a sense of that. But one of the frustrating things I think for a lot of people in my generation is it's like Charlie Brown with the football, because you kind of have it. Then I come home and it's like, oh no, you can't get a job of comparable quality, and like you're working at Starbucks or something, and
Mhm.
then your parents are in your case again, and it's like you kind of had it for a second, and then you come back to your homeland, and then it's lost again. Um, so I was really lucky, at least, to, you know, be able to have a job for a number of years that allowed me to keep painting, and allowed me to like travel through Western Europe and have a bit of a sense of responsibility and just independence, right? Because I'm actually physically in a different part of the world. Um, but then again, you know, with something like grad school, I mean, that's kind of really putting your chips on the table and saying, okay, I'm going to really pursue this, because, you know, there's some days where I think, oh, should I have done something more practical so I could have kind of um, cemented myself maybe better in notions of adulthood. And it's kind of, I think culturally, that whole being a fly boy is almost culturally kind of accepted, I think, in your 20s now.
Yeah.
Culturally, the idea that like, all right, you're gonna spend like a decade kind of finding yourself going to music, go to Coachella or go, I don't know, go. I went backpacking to India, you know, do stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
you kind of hit 30 and it's like, okay, now like get married, have kids, get your career started. Um, so sometimes I feel kind of a little bit of frustration when I was talking to younger MFAs who are like in their early mid 20s. Like very different doing it when you get older because there is more of a cult. It's not cute. It's not cute anymore. You know,
Yeah.
being 35 and like trying to make this work, right?
Yeah.
Has a different gravity to it. And so, yeah, I think within my work, I guess I was kind of entranced by that period in the early 20s, I guess, for my friends, like, because that's when a lot of those pictures that I was working from were taken, where it was kind of this sort of carefree, lost boy sort of year or time period. Um, and also just because I think the photographs I was using for some of these paintings, they were just old enough that they started to look dated. Like they looked like they were not contemporaneous. Just things like the wardrobe, like the way people dress, it's shifted a bit from like let's say like 2007, 2008. Or like a really good example would be there's the HBO show Entourage, which was like really popular in the mid 2000s, and the music's really seems dated, the clothing seems dated, the attitudes and the politics seem really, really dated. But that was kind of the age that I grew up in. So um, yeah, I think it's I don't know how you've managed it. I mean, you mentioned you have a family, but it's very difficult, I think, not to be like a perpetual flyboy in the arts because there's so much. The way one of my friends put it is, you're basically putting your own intellectual curiosity ahead of stability and pragmatism. That's kind of what you're doing if you're an artist.
Yeah, but it's something to where I feel like that intellectual curiosity wouldn't be enough to sustain me through the type of sacrifices that have had to be made
Yeah,
to keep up this practice, and uh, and it certainly wouldn't be enough just to be vain or just to be like pursuing glory, or like
yeah,
uh, a type of ambition that would only make room for one. Like those things I find are really more destructive
mm,
than anything else. And certainly would lead to like a type of self sabotage. Ultimately, without even intending for that to happen. Because that's when those things express themselves. That's what happens. It's like if you go around throwing rocks at windows, you're going to break windows. You might be great at aiming, but that's what's going on. And so I feel like, for me, it was, of course, yeah. I mean, yeah, intellectual curiosity, of course, like that's part of it. But man, for me, it's something where it has a spiritual component, and that is tied to the that is tied to every expression that that I give, just in my day-to-day living and the way that I relate to things and people and my environment. Like it all sort of it's it's all sort of tied up into the way that I exist, like my being, like ontologically, like
okay,
the way that I am. And so I wouldn't be able to divorce myself from that.
yeah,
And so, okay, so if I accept that to be so, then, but that doesn't give me like the golden ticket, to, for me, that wasn't my path. Like I didn't have the golden ticket to like not, or to avoid, these levels of personal responsibility, like
yeah,
getting married, having a family, providing for my family. Um, no, like I had that. I was 23 when I got married. Gladly, I was super excited, freaking out. I was so happy. Still am. You know, it's been close to 20 years, man. And I'm just like, I'm so grateful that that foolish little boy made that decision, a big life decision to do what he did for me to end up to where I am now. I have a wonderful woman in my life. Now, I didn't come out knowing what to do and how to do it, man. I made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
I still do. But I had to be willing to learn from them. And I had to be willing to aspire to something that was more life-giving. So that is what, and in my work, the work I think improved because of it. It strengthened because of it, right?
Mhm.
Because if you know, if what I'm pursuing is an expression of who I am, then ultimately if I make decisions that help me personally to grow in a direction that benefits other people and myself, then the work will follow, hopefully.
Mhm.
And it has. It has. Now, it has been difficult, man. It has been really hard. I've shed a lot of tears, you know, and you know, I've hurt people along the way, and but thank God it happened, you know, when I was younger, and because it's like the older I get, the more relationships I form,
Mhm.
and it's like the stakes are higher,
Yeah.
you know, especially with children, 4 children, two
Oh
boys,
yeah.
2 girls, you know. So and the interesting thing too is that before, the work was everything, like it
Yeah.
was everything, and like, and it still is everything, but in a different way. Before, it was everything in the sense that nothing else but the work is what I cared about. I mean, I cared about things,
Yeah.
I treasured that work. And if I made room for something, it was because it was for the work ultimately. And it was, you know, but now it's different. It's that the work is everything in the sense that everything is the work. Everything is the work. You know, my relationships, the way that I develop, the way that I treat people, the way that I love people, the way that I deal with suffering, or the way that I deal with pain,
Mhm.
or brokenness, or other people's issues, you know, that I can't control. Um, you know, all of these things, man, like these things that we all deal with. That that work, because it's work. That work is what makes the painting possible. What the painting needs to be, and the work that I make, what it needs to be, can only be that. It can only exist if I'm doing the work in all these other areas. So at first I thought it was an either or, and then I learned, um, kind of in a very clumsy and slow way, that and very messy way, that it's not either or. It's it's everything. The work is everything. So so you know, it's not just for me, it's not just a pursuit of intellectual curiosity. It's an actual way of life. It's a way of existing. It's a way of being, you know.
Yeah.
um and the things that I deny are the things that allow me, um in a sense, to be able to give life to those around me, to those I care about,
Mhm.
you know.
Interesting. So for you, based on your answer, it's quite clear. And that was my friend's way of framing it. And I guess particularly in grad school, they really like I said, they really lean, and especially in Canada, they really lean into that idea of when I was in school, they would always push this idea that the artist is a researcher.
Yeah.
I have a sense that well, I'm not sure how you feel about that. I was always kind of like suspect of that. They can be a researcher. That's one of the things they can do.
Yeah.
But in your answers, I think I really especially like how you talk about the spiritual component. Because for me, like I'm not like religious in the traditional sense, or I guess you classify me as like a non-believer in that sense of the word. But I am a big believer in different ideas of spirituality. Like I try to meditate here or there. And I think in some ways that I've been reading Yuval Harari's *Sapiens*, and it's like, okay, pretty evident based on what he says about early humans that like we have this kind of spiritual need that's very innate to
Yeah.
us. And if you don't, you can't just like get rid of it. Like it needs to be filled in some way.
Yeah.
Um, and there's different ways to fill it, but yeah, I think in one way, um, art and just even the practice, right? The same way that someone might go to prayer or like might meditate. Um, the ritualistic elements of it, like having the studio, the sanctuary studio, things like that. And it does connect up. So yeah, it does have that intellectual component. And then there's also something very, particularly with painting, what's so unique is how it's so connected to what it really is to be like a human being, because it goes back so far, right? We have these connections to it that go back, I mean, what, like 40, 50, 60,000 years? You can't really say that about installation art or something, right? So, you know, yeah, it's also interesting as what you said about like just how all these other parts, responsibilities that kind of go into it. Because in my program there was, I think, there's a painter the year ahead of me. His name was David LaFrance. He's still a fantastic Quebec-based artist. Yeah, he had kids, so he had probably more responsibility than. Not to say there other people didn't have responsibility in the program, but he had a family to like take care of. But he was one of the more disciplined artists when it came to studio work. Like he would kind of come in, he had his time to be there, and it's just get to work. There was no real sense of being tentative. He would just kind of go in and work really hard. Would you say that's part of it? Like just maybe the discipline that, like, if discipline is imposed in other parts of your life, then that discipline will also kind of trickle into your practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a real sink or swim kind of situation.
Yeah.
And really like treading water sucks. Yeah. It just sucks. At least if you're sinking, that you're like dying. And that's certainly a motivation. But treading water, you're not dying. I mean, you're not really going anywhere either, but you're not dying. And if you do it just right, you can lean back at a certain angle and kind of float. But like, what's really being accomplished? In something like that. And that's the kind of thing where, we were talking about time earlier, and how man, you let a certain amount of time go by floating. Yeah, there's some serious FOMO with that, man. Fear of missing out. Like that sucks. That's because you can't go back and get that. You can't get that back. And think about all the potential of what could have been that had just, it's gone. You can't get that back. So it's a real sink or swim situation. If it's, if one's really serious about it. So yeah, man, like, God, so having kids, and man, it's like, or if you get married, you're working jobs, or even if you're not married, you're just hustling, like it's that your time is limited. That you can't spend 10 hours in the studio every day and deliberate upon, which red to put on your palette. You can't do that kind of stuff. You've got to just get that done. And so all that thinking, which is important, I've learned to do outside of the studio. So I've got plates spinning all the time. And I've learned to get really good at it. And so I've got things that are just humming along all the time, thinking about stuff all the time. And I guess that's kind of what I meant by everything is like you kind of learn how to sort of tie everything together, so that everything can kind of like come with you, you know, and stay above that water, stay in, you know, above that rapid. And um, so yeah, man, like I remember when I started having kids, I couldn't be with the work. I couldn't be in front of the work, looking at the work and spending all that time doing it and thinking about it and deliberating about it like I could before. And at first I thought, I was like, how am I going to paint? How am I going to even like make these decisions if I'm not in the studio? And then I come into the studio, but I have like 10 minutes and then I got to leave again. I won't be back in for another day. Like, how am I supposed to do this work? I learned to I learned to burn these paintings in my mind. I would just like look at them and I would just burn them in my mind and they'd stay with me. I'd paint on the paintings in my head. And even when like I'd be teaching and lecturing and in between, I'd sit down and just think about these paintings. I'd do drawings about these paintings, you know, and I would like just make these really weird abstract compositions. Um, and just kind of play with shapes and playing with tension and playing with like different pictorial pressures and things like that, just playing around with them, you know. I would spend all of my time, you know, during the days that, I mean, I taught like there were semesters I taught 5, 6 class loads, man. Like
Oh,
it was insane. But I did it because, well, I actually ended up really loving teaching. I do
yeah.
love um and I was okay with it. I was actually, you know, I could do it, you know, um but what I taught also tied into my work, you know,
Yeah.
um and so I could like continue with that research and I was just always thinking about it. So when I went in the studio, it was just like on. Like I walk in and I hit it hard, man, and I go after it. And I don't it wasn't like, oh man, I can't make a mistake. Oh, you know, it was like there was no room for that. It was like I had spent so much time thinking about it and being with it, being close to it, like here and here, that when I got in the studio, it was a matter of expressing it through the material. But I already had a sense of kind of where I was going. Not like it wasn't like it was all crystallized in front of me, but I had a very clear direction in a sense. And I would just go after it. And I didn't paint like that in grad school. I would waste so much time in grad school. Way I would waste. I thought I wasn't. I thought I was being like productive and disciplined, but man, no, I wasn't. I wasted so much time. So, um,
And so what was you went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine, or where did you do your grad school?
yeah, that's right. PAFA, yeah, Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. Yeah, it was a great school, a great experience. Met some wonderful painters there. We had actually a really strong community of figurative based painters on my MFA year.
Okay.
That sort of that's what eventually led to Perceptual Painters. That collective was the desire to continue with that sense of community and support.
And I'm curious, so do they have more of a at PAFA, do they have more of like an atelier approach to grad school? Like, is it more similar like New York Academy of Art, or how would you like how would you find like the balance for the construction?
Hmm. Dave, I'm sorry, man. Could you say that last part again? That the audio just
Oh, sorry.
for us.
So I was curious about like how your grad school went in terms of like the curriculum, because I think PAFA is a little bit different than most programs where it's sort of like completely hands off. It's more research and critique, but you were saying it's more of like they train like figurative painters there, right?
Well, okay, so yeah, so like the certificate program, and they have a BFA program there, and certainly in the certificate program that's designed after, I would say the historically what the school was founded for and what it was
Mhm.
best known for, um, and what was sort of carried on, you know, with like Chase and Akins and those guys, you know, and uh, Mary Cassatt went there, you know, like it's got this like super long and amazing history. The school does. It was the first art school founded in America, and so it has this like long sort of history of academic training and rigor, you know, classical kind of approaches, but it's classical systems and things like that. But the MFA program is entirely different than that. It's like actually completely separate from that. And so yeah, it's much more conceptual based, very hands off, which I thought was wonderful. You know, you know, you really have to kind of, you can't really, you know, go, you can't you can't really you can't really wander around, you know, saying, are you my mother? Like, are you my mother? You know what I mean? Like, you have to kind of go in with the sense of like, you just have to kind of throw a lot of stuff at the wall, you know, and see what sticks, you know. Or a lot of, maybe a really badass painter would go in there and just be like, I know what I'm doing, like, let's go. You know, there were some painters who like just crushed it while they were there. So just, or even like artists, man, like they had this clear sense. They knew their aesthetic. Their craft was like really honed. I was not that way. You know, I was more like this doe-eyed, like green, you know, wet behind the ears, kind of. I had no idea what was going on. But the community there was, they were very kind, uh, and so, and I actually, you know, I was surrounded by some great critics, and who were really hard on me, you know, but they believed in what I was doing, or at least they believed in the potential, maybe what I wasn't doing that they thought I could be doing, that I didn't know how to do, you know, at the time. But I think there was something where they were sort of like, they were like, well, there's something there, you know. I remember this one critic, he brought in a curator from some, I forget, this museum, it wasn't like the MoMA or anything, actually it might have been, but he brought him in, and in front of everybody, he was looking at this painting that I made. He looked at me, he's like, you know, you're so much of a better painter than this, you know. Yeah, like I had critics that were like that, but I, you know, he was somebody that he really meant that. He wasn't saying that just to cut me down because of his ego, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, he really meant it, and he was a good teacher.
Mhm.
He was a visiting critic at the school, but he also taught in other places and stuff. But I knew that he was right. I just didn't know how to get to whatever place he thought I should be getting to. You know what I mean? At the time, I could only do what I was doing, which was making just a lot of really bad paintings, and just sort of like fumbling my way through it. But I held on to that, you know, and all of my struggles and all like the really, because I had a lot of really bad critiques, man, in my program. Good critiques that were just hard. Like, they were great critiques. The critics were awesome. They knew exactly what they were talking about, but they were really hard. But every single one has helped me to kind of, you know, move along the way. And that was a huge departure from the question. I apologize for that. Overall, the program was great. It was very conceptual, very hands off. And yeah, we had to develop a thesis, and we had to write a thesis paper, and we had the body of work that we made for our like final MFA show had to support that thesis.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's, I mean, that's actually not that different than the program I did.
Yeah.
It is interesting though, you mentioned this, these tough critiques, like these, I think James Elkins would call it, is he wrote a book about art critiques. I think he keeps revising it, but the boot camp critique. And one of the strange, and I have this weird theory about it that maybe it's part of a larger cultural context. Like, I wonder sometimes if it's like there's a stereotype that Canadians are nice, you know, because I kind of, I've had a few professors at Concordia that taught in the States or were from the States. And yeah, it seemed much more kind of like, all right, like shit is hitting the fan, brass tacks, like let's go. For me, one of the strange things was I had more of that experience in undergrad than grad school. In grad school, they were very kind of, and maybe part of it did have, well, I think part of it maybe also was the whole COVID situation, just like they didn't want people to snap because people were already at the stress levels were already so high. But yeah, it was actually, it could be kind of hard to just really get a no nonsense straight answer to people. Fortunately, I was able to find that with a few people. We had one older prof, who's probably in his 70s, who, my first critique in December of 2022, right before COVID hits, there was a student, and the work maybe wasn't where it needed to be, and it seemed kind of all over the place, and it was sort of the elephant in the room. And I was like, oh, I wonder if anyone's going to say that. And then this guy kind of goes in and just like, I don't know if sorry, I'm a bit cold still. I don't know. I don't know if it was like cruel, or I felt kind of weird about it after, but I was like, well, it is grad school. It's not like this isn't like a community drop-in paint night where he's making some stay-at-home mom like cry who just wanted a night off from the kids. Like this is, so there's that's kind of, it's funny though, because this has this idea like of tough but honest and you grow. It's become a real, and I don't know what your opinion is on it, but with some of my other colleagues, it's become something that we kind of talk about sometimes at length, especially with undergrads, like, and with COVID and everything that happened, this idea of we don't want to be like when we were teaching our classes for the first time, teaching, undergrad classes, like, okay, we want to be fair, equitable, inclusive, all these things, but we also don't want to lower the bar so far that people are just walking over it.
Yeah. I completely agree. Because here's the thing, like, if we don't set the bar higher than they are willing to, we are not teaching them how to set the bar high, because they're not, if we're not doing it, they're not going to do it when they're out in their studio and making work that just sucks, and the thing is, like, the generation of professors from like the 50s, the 60s and 70s, man, those professors just kicked ass. They would like have like their cigarettes and like dropping ash on your palette and blowing smoke in your painting and like coughing in your face, and they're like, this is shit. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you even in this class? And like, but the type of student, the caliber of student, and the mindset in that time, they were like that was like a pep talk. Like it was like equivalent of someone grabbing like a football player like by their helmet and getting the face mask and like rallying them up. Like it's like they would do it because one they knew that the student had so much more potential. They could bring so much more to the table, but they were playing it safe, because talent doesn't matter. Like, what matters is what you're willing to give, because you can hone talent, but it's like, what are you willing to give? And if you give everything, then man, like it all follows. Like, but you have to be willing to give everything. You got to show up and really take some serious risks, right? And that's what they were talking about, man. Like, they're like, don't waste my time. Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Right. But now it's like different, because now it's like, well, you hurt my feelings.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess that is the hard thing, and I feel I'm of two minds about your take on it. There's a part of it that totally agrees for me. Like, I think, especially when I started undergrad, like, I was a middle class white kid from the suburbs. I was pretty cocky. Like, I was a full on. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's the idea that, like, the less you know about something, the more confident you are. Then the more you know about something, the less confident you are. Yeah. I think I fully crossed that curve, but I was definitely the other side at 18. And I truly needed that. Like, for me personally, based on my lived experience, my attitude, I needed that. And I had some really tough great teachers. In particular, I remember I had a painter, Elizabeth McIntosh. She's had some success recently, like in New York and stuff. She's one of the best painters I think Canada has to offer right now. And yeah, she wouldn't throw a cigarette. Very quiet, right? But yeah, like if it didn't work, she would say it didn't work. Usually it doesn't work. Kind of more modernist language. Um, and then we had another teacher. I don't know if I should name. Is it okay to name names? I'm not saying, just like profs I had. We had another painter teacher, Philippe Raffinol, fantastic painter. Yeah, he was French. He was tough, like tough but fair. Like if you liked something, you knew he liked it, right? Um, and then there was a third painter who still teaches there at Ben Reese. He was just like the nicest guy you ever met in your life. Like the closest thing, like maybe like Mr. Rogers in an artist, but super like in terms of like depth of knowledge and painting ability, like second to none. And I still really truly look up to his work. I guess the hard thing I think with teaching students is it's a little bit, in some ways you're kind of like a coach. And there was this small anecdote, but I think it connects with what we're saying. There was this case in Canada for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the hockey team, a couple of years ago, where they had this coach, Mike Babcock, and he didn't do anything inappropriate, but all these things came out that, they're like, oh, this guy's a really terrible person, the way he just treats people. Like he made a player on the team list off the effort level of his teammates, and then he told the other teammates about what this player said. I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. And so he got fired. He lost his job over all this stuff that came out. And then you had two stories emerge. You had some players would say, this guy caused like so much anxiety for me, like he ruined my life. He's a horrible human being, terrible. And then you had other players say, if it weren't for this guy, like really kicking my ass, I would have been out of the league in like a year. And the hardest thing is both those things are true at the same time.
Right.
And
Right.
so the hardest thing I think now that professors and art teachers face, and maybe that probably expands their fields, but just the subjectivity of art in general makes it harder, is that that really hard ass teacher, they will help some students thrive, and they will crush other students that could have thrived under different teachers into dust. And I don't know. The only answer I can think of is kind of the way that Concordia did it. Like the school I went to, and they didn't do it, I think, by design. It was just serendipitous, but they just had a very eclectic staff of teachers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's one way of rectifying it. As an individual teacher, I don't know. That's tough because you're expected to be completely consistent in how you treat students, but the reality is it is kind of like coaching, and you really need to figure out what levers to push. And some of them really need that 1950s cigarette talk, and some don't. Some need actually to be like more support.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's absolutely right. That is very true. And I think that I would say, like, what is vital for a teacher is, and this is the thing too, like, I think because there were times when teaching would be such a performance that there was a lot of there made room for the ego to like exercise a lot of what was going on, during during those performances. Sometimes it was, living up to reputation, that kind of thing. But it didn't matter because what they were giving, like what they were offering, was still so good, and the temperament and the position of the students at that time were such that they could deal with that level of harshness. They'd just been through a war and all that kind of stuff, and there's still the depression echoing in their ears. And so I think, so there was a certain kind of temperament, I think, then that there is just not now. So it seems that like the best teachers that I know are the ones who are humble, and the ones that really care about the student with with the objective of helping them, kind of coaching them, like you were talking about, in that sense, where to the point where they become empathetic with the student, like they can read the student, you know, and they're really good at reading them, and they're really good at sort of like seeing like what that student needs, and being able to have their approach to teaching be such a way that it's that they can pivot quickly. So they can work with one student and have one kind of temperament, and pivot and go on to another student who's completely different, you know, whose work may need some of the same things, you know, to be discussed, but to do it in a way that they can receive it and really benefit from. And so it really comes down to understanding, like, well, what benefits this student the most? What benefits this student the most if you're working kind of on a one-to-one kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then, you know, it depends too, like the size of the group, of the student body that you know, you're working with. If it's like much bigger, or much smaller, you know, if it's a, you know, like an MFA group of students, you know, or a larger kind of BFA group of students, or whatever it is, you can sort of find a way kind of in the middle that makes it sort of accessible, you know, to all the students in a way. Maybe not quite as potent as on a one-to-one basis, but still very applicable. I had a range of critics that were like that. I had some critics that were like very mystical, and they would tread lightly, but they could put a heavy foot down when it was needed. And I had other critics who were just like, it was the heavy hand all the way. And I benefited from both, you know, which was, I'm glad that I was able to do it, you know, but
Did you ever get the sense with the heavy-handed ones? Because you mentioned there were people in your program that were crushing it. Did you ever get the sense that they were kind of playing up a bit of a trope? Like they kind of came in with the mindset, I'm going to do a boot camp trick with these MFA people, like some bones are going to break, some ego. Did you ever get that sense, or was it more like, no, it was completely based off of what they were seeing?
there's a bit of both, to be honest. Like, I don't think it was either like one or the other. You know, I'm sure that there are those out there that really are kind of more of that, just like they're in it really more for themselves than the students, you know, and these other people, the painters and whatnot. And it's really more about what they can say than what they're giving, you know, and then what they're providing. But the critics that I had, you know, like the more heavy-handed ones, yeah, there was ego in it, but it did not get in the way, or I should say, it didn't replace or diminish their love for painting and for teaching. So so what they gave me I mean, look, I mean, there were a handful of instances like these gems that were given to me when I was, you know, being reprimanded for the kind of work that I was making, you know, or something that I would say or ask about. And you know, it was like, you know, they were like, what, you know, and they would like really tear into the work, and it wasn't abusive or anything, but it was like hard. And at the time, man, I just was like dizzy. I was like, whoa, like this, like what was that, you know? And but I held on to it because I did recognize there was. I'll give you an example. There was a critic who, when I asked them about a particular technique that they do in their work, you know, he just like stopped talking and looked at me and said it in this tone. It was like, he's like, I will never tell you about my technique, or just technique in general. You know, like I had said something really bad. Like I seriously offended this guy, right? But he said, he's kind of paused, and he told me why. And he said, because technique without context is dead. It's meaningless. and that was it. He didn't explain it. He didn't go into it. He just left it, right? But I held on to that, and I didn't really understand. I kind of like got the sense that, oh, there's truth to that, but I didn't understand like the significance, the implications of it at the time, really. And that was something, man. That has carried me through every crisis that I've encountered in my own work, and the struggle that is there in the formation of the work, and the formation of myself as a painter. When I'm like just like really like pushing for something and I don't know what it is, there's just this like this momentum that's like propelling me forward. It's like I'm just searching. I'm like reaching, right? I'm like kind of digging for things, and like clawing at a wall, like trying to make a door kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like those types of like those little nuggets of like wisdom help me so much as I work through all that.
That's a good line. Technique without context is dead. Is
Yeah.
that what? No, that's it. So, well, I guess, I mean, that leads into like it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but I think it still kind of exists, especially in university art programs. Like, what's your opinion on, if you're running a painting class for undergrads, like just how much shop and technique stuff should be in there? Like, especially because, you went to a school that had a more technical kind of grounding in terms of its resources. You mentioned the MFA program wasn't like that, but has that history. I mean, Mary Cassatt went to the school, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that? Like, because I know that for me, it was really frustrating. Like, I remember first year art school, I was like, I felt like I just felt confused the whole time. I didn't feel like I was learning anything. And I had students come up to me who had other teachers saying, "I don't learn anything." Like they're really hungry for it. How do you feel about that? Like, how much of that stuff should be taught in school and how much should be focused more on conceptual elements or other elements or research or whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's a question that I feel like needs to be addressed constantly.
Mhm.
But I do find that there's no substitute for the fundamentals. Like the painter at least should have a level of mastery of the fundamentals. You got because really like what makes for the best painting is not it's not what you don't know. It's what you know and what you do with it. Like it's like when you learn these systems that that come with all of this history, and that come with and because of that, it has this like amazing burden of authority. Um, that's good because and it's like, well, let's break it. Like
Yeah.
let's just break this. Like let's just break all of these and get like let's just make some chaos. And the chaos is important because it provides the painter an opportunity to bring order into it. And the thing is, it's like when a young painter begins to learn like the fundamentals, there's very little chaos there. There's a lot of fear, I think, of the unknown, and there's a lot of like lack of experience, in that sense. But once you get like a sort of like a handle on the fundamentals of painting, and by the way, it's like you still like you can get a handle of the fundamentals and still not know anything. And that's the case. I mean, I feel like I don't know anything about painting, um, because of how big and how vast it is, and I mean, I don't see an end to it personally.
Yeah, you kind of just, yeah, that is the other side of the Dunning-Kruger thing, right? Where you're just like, this is the thing I'm supposed to know the most about of all the things I've studied. Like, it's the only thing for me at least, that I've like tried to consistently study and get better at. And then you kind of realize like, oh man, I know next to nothing about it. Like
I don't know anything.
I know barely enough to navigate it and like maybe possibly competently sort of possibly make okay things now. I don't even think that's true. I thought that was true when I was 20. I was like, oh, I'm right around the corner, man. These galleries are going to come. And then you're 15 years later, you're like, oh no, man, I don't know what's going on at all. And I guess being okay with that as well. That's the hard thing, right? Yeah, I think
I love it. I love it. I love not feeling like I have a handle on it, because I honestly feel like I would get bored with it if I did.
Yeah, I think if you got too locked into one way of doing things, it's just because there's just always different, especially I guess the last couple of years. I guess that this is the weirdest thing for me right now. This was like that idea of self-doubt I think I mentioned talking about today in our notes for the call. The weirdest thing for me right now is that there's all this kind of maybe a little bit more social pressure to figure things out, whether the grad school's over, like what are your next steps, what's the plan, and there's anxiety around that. But then, and there's also, it's not that I want to give up being a painter, but maybe it's more about, do I need to rearrange my life in a way where not everything is being led by this thing, where it's in a different arrangement, where maybe there's more pragmatism and less pursuit, I guess. That's happening at the same time but at the same time, it's like the paintings just finally sort of kind of starting to get interesting, and it's such a conflict when those two things are happening at the same time. But it's like you said, like if you throw rocks at windows, you're going to break some windows eventually. Like, well, yeah, if you've been hammering away at something for, I think I started painting when I was like 15, and I'm 35 now. Well, yeah, of course, if you hammer away at something for like that long, you're going to get better at it. Like it will get better, but it's tough. Like I remember like at Christmas, I was talking to my dad and he was like worried about me. He's like, he said it right. He was like, you're kind of living this like cheese grater lifestyle. Like it's a tough go. And you've been at this for like 20, like you've been painting for 20 years. Like, what do you tap out? And of course, this is like an artist talking to an engineer about it. That's kind of a hard to get you both on the same page. And I don't think we ever will be, but there's some truth to that too. Like, okay, we need balance in life. But it's hard because the more like it really opens, like I think the longer you do it, it really does kind of open up in waves. Like that initial wave when you're getting the handle on the technique of painting, and then maybe you get a little more, and then you do it for a really long time, and then it kind of opens up again in a different way. At least that's kind of how I feel about it. Like I feel very differently about painting than I did like 3 or 4 years ago. Like before school, like I feel completely differently about it. It's become so much more simplified. It's complex but simple in a way. So yeah, I feel really weird about that. That's a really kind of weird word salad way of describing how I currently feel about it. But yeah, that's I guess I'll leave it to you.
No, man, I think that's a very, that's a very fair, that's a great description. It's one of those things that, painting is so dynamic, and I think that it's incredibly evasive. Like, it's how do you, it's like as soon as I think I have an understanding of something, my understanding of it changes. And I realized that what I thought was the entirety of the thing itself, I realized was just one very small part or aspect of it, and it's like, God, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, that's right. I forget like how quickly I assume that I progress much further than I actually do. And the thing is, it's like, I feel like my relationship to the work and the painting is changing like annually. It's like, it's the way that I think about painting has changed so dramatically in the past 10 years. I have friends who are like, damn, dude, crisis again? Like, you just got over one. Like, what's going on? But then the work is really changing. The sophistication of the work. I feel like the work is deepening. It's like deepening, and that to me is very positive. So like I look at the work and I'm like, well, okay, so these struggles are part of this deepening, and I have to be willing to really have the courage to face that and enter into these spaces, um and of course it requires my wife Elizabeth to be very patient, you know with with me during those times. But um yeah, I mean, I feel like it's when a painter begins to have an understanding of, a certain basic level of mastery over the fundamentals of painting. And when I say mastery, I don't mean like Velasquez mastery. I mean just like where you kind of get a sense of like, well, if I want this to do this, I can make that happen. Or if I want this to do this, I can make that happen on the fundamental basic level. I think it gets harder when because of the way that you develop in your mind, in your relationship to looking, and how you think about the visible world, and how you think about just like the way that like certainly the more you think about something and the more attention you give it, the more dynamic it becomes, because things are, phenomenologically, like they're just freaking amazing. They're very deep. Like it's incredibly expansive. It's like there's no end to it, right? So the more time you give to it, the bigger it gets. And so it gets to the point where you begin asking from painting more than it has been giving you, more than it can give you, up to that point. And so that's when you have to begin to really break these systems down, because and really kind of evolve and work into your own. That's where the chaos is, because it's when you depart from this long history of hard, like hardly fought, like people, these have been fought hard for, man, and hard won. But with every system has its own limitations, but then there's a reason for these systems to begin with, and so it's important to learn the contexts for that too, and see if you have a place in that. And at first it doesn't matter if you do or not, because you got to learn them. But then when you begin needing something from painting that is beyond the scope of those fundamentals, then that's when things get really interesting, because that's when like you really begin to discover, like you find in yourself like how creative, like how far can you go with what you know, and into what you don't know, and begin kind of like bringing order into these like chaotic spaces of the unknown, and kind of find your way through that, in the work. And that's like where, for me, that's what the crisis is, man. And really it's like it's in that kind of transition where I'm having to let go of what I fought so hard to attain, that I felt like was so important to get, and it was. And now I've got to let that go, and I've got to like really move into something else yet again, that I have to fight hard for, that I have to like bring order into, that I've got, and it's really hard. But having that kind of basic foundation established is so important, because that's going to be a touchstone. Like you'll go back to that, like, because you always go back,
Do you find, like, because it's interesting you mentioned, yeah, like another crisis, that kind of way of thinking about it, or like just trying to change things up. I mean, historically speaking, maybe the most famous example of that would be Philip Guston, when he had his like show in Marlborough in '71. All of a sudden, this, not the top echelon abstract expressionist, but like, like really great second tier, just a smidge below, Pollock and the career, whatnot, right? And then you go and do this other thing. And when I was in grad school, like I read I think it was Hilton Kramer. I read one of the reviews for that show. It was just completely scathing, and it's like, yeah, like everyone loves to talk about risk in terms of like it paying off, or like it's kind of like everyone loves the story about someone Hollywood scripts about that, you know, and like when it comes to biopics and things.
Oh yeah.
But risk entails possibility of failure and misfortune, right?
Sure.
And I was curious, so for you professionally, like, I mean, it's okay in BFA and in grad school to put on a new hat all the time, but do you ever have situations where there's been like professional pushback, or like maybe dealers are kind of like, oh, I don't know that you should be doing this, or like, because I mean, you do kind of, we all kind of, as artists, we do kind of eventually sort of develop a bit of a brand or identity that people become familiar with, and then they may not. I mean, you know, Bob Dylan got booed when he changed the way he made songs, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just curious how you've navigated that, or have you gotten the support you've needed, or do you think is it more a matter of just making sure you meet the right people who will always support you through those things? Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, I certainly think that if you're doing something for the right reasons, then those people that you need around you will be there. Like they'll come. They'll come. Um, I do believe that. And that certainly has been the case for me. It's not like it's been a really it's not like it's been like an easy road, but it's been a good road in that sense. I would say that, like, for me, I can't allow myself to get too attached to the idea of me, right? So like, um, you know, I most of the time do not like what I do, than like what I do. So like, most of the time I'm just like, I really missed the bar on that. I really missed the mark on that. Um, but there'll be something in the work. It's almost like, it's kind of like when I'm doing what my critics did. I look at the work in a very loving way. I don't hate it. I'm not like hating on it, or cruel to it. But I'm very fair because I care about it. And I put a lot of love into it. And so like, but I look at the potential, and I look at, yeah, there's so much that has been missed. I'm like, I'm not, because I haven't found a way to paint. I haven't found a way to paint the way that I want to paint. You know, like I'm moving toward that, but I can't do anything but paint the way that I paint now. But there are times when I do things that I think point to something ahead, that excites me. I get really excited about it. And I think that's the most important thing for me is kind of, I'm striving towards something in the work. The work is not an end. The work is not an end, in itself. It's a means to an end, right? So like, and if it ever got to the point where it was the end, then it's over, man. It's over. Like,
It solves itself. Yeah, it's kind of like
you know,
there's a really great scene in have you ever seen the film Midnight in Paris?
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, Woody
there's
Allen,
that
right?
Woody Allen, yeah. There's a fantastic scene where Owen Wilson's character has traveled back in time and he's in Gertrude Stein's apartment and Picasso's there. And I think the actor playing Picasso only speaks French. They're having this like super lively debate about his most recent painting, and it's just this amazing scene where, oh my God, I'm in Gertrude Stein's apartment, right? And it's this huge debate about the painting, whether or not it works, doesn't work. And then when he goes back into the present time, the painting's hanging in a museum on a wall, and someone else, the know-it-all amongst them, is telling them all what it's about. And I thought it was such a great juxtaposition of scenes for just like the act of creation, and like how it's in a coffin, it's in that institution, it's like, oh, it means X, Y, and Z. It's this is what it is. Which, it's hard for students, I think, to kind of unlearn that, because they think that that's the goal.
Yeah,
Like, especially, it's always like nails on chalkboard, like when they say, I haven't found my style yet. I'm like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
really can't think of it that way. It's like, what was the Beatles style? Like, I don't know, they had like 50 and they constantly ran through them and then they were done. Yeah, that's a hard thing. And I feel the same way, actually. Like, it's just sort of like, I do find, I guess, maybe once there's been enough time has gone by, like, you might look at something from 5 or 10 years ago and, oh, I actually, a broken clock's right twice a year, whatever, twice a day, and you like something you made. And you maybe have for me at least, I might have kind of an attachment to it, thinking where I made it. Like I have like these rolls of paintings I made in Korea, and then I have a roll of paintings I made in China. So there's maybe a few here or there that I like, but yeah, for the most part, it's always like it's always just almost not quite.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
I've even heard like Paul McCartney say that I've been talking about writing songs. He's like, yeah, I still felt that about these songs that are considered masterpieces. Oh, we almost got it, not quite.
yeah, and you know, there's a part of me that is relieved about that.
Oh yeah, it'd be terrible if you kind of figured it all out. I mean, I know I don't necessarily love his paintings as much anymore, but the American painter John Curran has such interesting interviews about ego and self-doubt. And I mean, he's had crazy success, but I think I remember him talking about like, yeah, when he had like the Whitney show and all these things happen, it was like in crisis because it's like when you're at the top of the mountain, you're kind of like, where do I go from here? You know?
Yeah.
And he went on to make some pretty weird, very crass paintings. But yeah, I guess you kind of always need to have that some sort of North Star thing to kind of shoot for.
Yeah, and you're right. And the problem is that sometimes the mountain that's being climbed is not the mountain. It's not like your mountain. And so you get to the top of it, but it was never your mountain. You just got to the top of a mountain. Really, the one that you need to climb is a lot bigger. You know, like you really should never get to the top. If you do, the mountain that you're climbing isn't big enough. You know, like who can get to the top of painting? Even Rembrandt, like as great as he wasn't at the top. Not for him. Velasquez wasn't. Like, you know, it's like there's a constant evolution. Like I mean, it doesn't stop. That's the beauty of it. That's what I love about it. You know, I think that the best thing any painter could do is to paint into their nature. So there's no style. There's just an expression of who you are. You know, and the closer you get to that, the more personalized, the more like, I don't want to say idiosyncratic because that's not the right term, because it's not like it's independent of everything so that you can't understand it, but it's like we're so far removed from everything else, but it's a part of something. It's unique. It's just something that's incredibly unique, but it's still a part of everything. It's still a part of this discussion of painting. It's a part of humanity. It's a part of human expression. You know, it's like 60 to 80,000 years old, you know. I want to say something about that Gustin show that you brought up that I actually came across just a few days ago. I was reading this lecture that Philip Gustin was giving shortly after that exhibition, maybe a couple years after the exhibition, and yeah, like the critics. I mean, I think Rosenberg gave him a really good review. But he was the only one. And there was one in the New York Times that tore him up bad. To which Philip Gustin said, "Well, he's like, I'm glad. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if he actually liked him. You know, kind of referring to the guys just missing the boat anyway. Like, I'm glad he doesn't like him because it just means that what I hope the work is doing it. But Gustin suffered a lot of pushback from his contemporaries and his peers in painting, man. Like a lot of painters that respected his work, that supported him, as people who considered his friends.
That was betrayal.
There was betrayal. They were like, dude, you're done. Like, and I got nothing else to do with you. Except Willem de Kooning was at that show with Gustin, and Willem de Kooning came up to him and he said, "I envy you." He said, "I envy you." You know, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. You know, like just that guy, Gustin had the courage at that point in his career to make that point of departure, you know, into something that wasn't well received at the time, but man, I mean, like, look at us now. We're like looking at that.
We're all living.
Oh my gosh, it works amazing.
Yeah.
You know, like this work is amazing, you know, and it's like, right. I mean, so yeah, I mean, all that we can really do is to continue evolving and not to get too attached to ourselves and to the work, man. Like we have to really pursue what it's becoming. I think that's really important, you know.
Okay, not to stay on Gustin for too long, but I don't know, like if you had this experience yourself, or if maybe your students had this, but I think actually it might have been because I know they had the show and they canceled the show, and then I think it's back on now, and there's all that controversy in the art world. But one of my friends I think had the catalog for the show that didn't happen, and there was like a forward and different artists talking about Gustin, and then Dana Schutz I think wrote about being like 18 and seeing them for the first time, like in a book or something, and being like, oh, why is this in here? These are terrible. Like, oh, like, and I had the exact same reaction. And I'm curious because it is, maybe it's, yeah, there's something about them that once you get into painting, you just absolutely love them. But it's sort of this thing that I think when you show them people who, not to like be a gatekeeper of painting or anything, but oftentimes people don't have the friendliest of reactions when they first see them. And that's not even getting to the iconography. That's a completely different discussion. But I'm just curious what your first reaction was to seeing like Gustin, or if you liked it right away, or if you're like, oh,
Oh man, you know, well, I found that with his earlier work, I was able to relate to that pretty easily.
yeah,
Um, and I also like I loved his abstract paintings. Even I didn't even know what they were about or anything like that, but just visually, man, they grabbed me. I mean they really did. And I think it was like it was the way that he was it was the way that he was like his like the relationship to the material, and like the way that he was treating the surface and moving through color and tone and like the space. And it was just, man, I was like, God, I wish I could make those paintings. Like, they're so amazing. It wasn't even just about the paintings. It was like to be in that state where those paintings would manifest. Like, God, I wish I could be at a place where I could think like that and feel that way and kind of like, and so that would just sort of come out of me, like it's more like that, like what was he thinking about? What was he like? How was he relating to things, And but the work that came later was work that I sort of, it took time for me to really like find a place in it,
mhm.
because especially, man, I mean, the way that I relate to paintings now is so vastly different from how I did even like 7 years ago. Yeah. And so I mean, so even up to like even after graduate school, like I wouldn't have been able to, I just wouldn't have been able to receive the gift that those paintings offer.
That's a
um
great way of putting it.
but yeah, I mean, right, I mean, it's such, isn't it, like it's such a gift, right? And it's like I just wouldn't have been able to receive it, and I felt the same way about Morandi, man. Undergrad, I didn't really understand. Like my professor was so, he had such great instincts, and he was showing me Morandi, and they were doing this like exercise in space, and I didn't see it, I didn't understand it, I didn't even understand the concept. It was just like too abstract. It was like way beyond me at the time, and um, but Morandi is one of my favorite painters, and so is Gustin. You know, and it isn't just the imagery; it's really more about the way that he moves through the paint, like his relationship to the material. It's like the it's like the it's like it's the way that he expresses through the material that I find, and I love the imagery too, but it's like the way that that form develops, the way that he develops form, the way that he searches for form and how it emerges, and I mean, it's like his forms, man, the solidity, like they're so poetic and they're so substantial. I just, I'm like, man, I wish I could just paint like that. Like, I wish I could find form like that in my work. Like I wish I could, because I know it's there. I feel it. Like I sense it, man. Um, Yet I haven't quite found a way to paint that. So, I'm striving towards that. Those types of things. It's the feeling that the paintings have, that they imbue. Like they have this energy, this like presence, um, that just hits me in the gut every time I see it.
Yeah, it's funny. In Canada, we do this, or they used to. They stopped doing it. They had this painting competition that the bank, the RBC bank, would put on every year. And they'd have, like 15 finalists, and then they'd pick one national winner. And and I mean, hey, it's an opportunity for people to show their work, so that's a good thing. Although the idea of a contest and the winner kind of antithetical to art, but I remember like every year I'd be so incensed over who they chose when I was like an undergrad. Like, oh, this isn't good painting. And there was one painting in particular. It was very. It was like a butterfly on a television. It was like this kind of monochromatic background. It was kind of like a cheeky sort of had a pop art aesthetic. I remember looking at this thing like, this is just absolute crap. And then maybe like 2 years ago or 1 year ago at the MFA studio, um, we had all these kind of old art books lying around. One of them was a catalog of 15 or 20 years of the RBC competition. And it was so funny looking through it because they were images I hadn't looked at in maybe since I was 20. And a lot of these paintings that I thought were crap when I was 20, now that I had painted more, oh, I just love the way that they did that. Or like this bad painting I speak of, it had this gorgeous kind of like broken color, kind of static that they put in the painting. So sumptuous and amazing. And it was just, I just didn't see it.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what gifts were being offered up because I was still, like 19 and entranced by Dali.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Everyone needs to go through it. I mean, there's a weird phenomenon with Dali and like I don't know, dorm room posters and being like, I mean, he was like my first love, I guess.
Yeah.
But 18, Gustin, gross, Dali's a god. Then I don't know. I still kind of there's a part of my childhood that likes him, but I looked through the old Dali book and I was like, I don't know.
That's all right, man. Yeah, I mean, we all have that. I mean, my thing, dude. I was swept up big time when I very first started painting. I was swept up by Sargent. I just was like,
That's a pretty good painter to get swept up with.
well, but the thing is, like, I should have been swept up by Velasquez, man.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like, but anyway, I had this such a romantic, and I still do, but I think especially early on, it was much more sentimental than it was romantic. Understanding or like attachment to painting and like images and uh, but this, it's funny because the things that attracted me when I first got into it attract me now, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
And I think that that's every I've had students who ask me, they're like, what do you mean by paint into your nature? Like, how do what does that mean? And I just tell them, I'm like, pay attention to what attracts you, not what you're told, to like, or what you're told should be important or favored or valued, but pay attention to what really grabs you and spend time with it. Like, draw towards that, follow that, and because it reveals something about your aesthetic, your sensibilities, um, you know, the way that the artist related to things who made these paintings, you're finding a place in that, and you can develop that within yourself, with some effort and some time and attention. Um, but I look back on that, and I'm like, oh man, this crazy young painter, didn't know anything. But that was the doorway. Like that was the doorway that led me into this incredible reality, this incredible world. And I'm so grateful for that. Dave, I apologize, man, but I have to.
Oh no, I was gonna say, yeah, we've had a pretty long chat. It's been, I think, an hour and 40. But
This has been
absolutely,
wonderful, man. I've
yeah,
so enjoyed talking with you.
me as well, likewise, yeah. And I gotta say, like, yeah, your work, I just absolutely love. I think you're such a painter's painter, you know. I think actually at Christmas I was like, yeah, we have this. I told my dad, I was like, we have this talk with this artist. He's like, does he make a living off of it? And I'm like, oh my god, Dad, Jesus Christ! Like, I was like, what's more important is how good the paintings, my God, because Thomas Kincaid made a lot of money, but no, I just love the work. You're such a painter's painter, so I hope you can still keep in touch. And I just, yeah, it's great hearing your journey, and I hope to keep doing it. And it's great having conversations like these.
Oh, Dave, that means a great deal. Thank you so much, man.
All right, stay in touch, and best luck with all your projects in 2023.
Hey, you too.
Okay, thanks.
All right, take care, man.